Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Stalwarts here, day 2 of Cloud Expo Silicon Valley, 11th Cloud Expo. Good evening, gentlemen. Disappointing that they're only gentlemen, but I make apologies for that later. Here we come to the CEO Power Panel. We have CEOs mostly. It doesn't matter. We're not going to be too dogmatic about this. But what we are going to do is explore this theme of whether it's true to say that there's no business like the cloud business. Seems a fairly safe bet. But we've got to ascertain who we have with us, why and wherefore. And we're going to do it in the usual lateral way because I'm sure you'll have plenty of opportunity to tell us what your incredible companies are and what they do. So I just want you to respond to the following question. We'll start with you, Chris. We'll go in order. I'm thinking that all IT trends are, in some respect, like all other IT trends. Number one, position number one. Position number two, I'm thinking that all IT trends are probably only like some IT trends. And then there's a possibility 3 that all IT trends in some respects are like no other IT trend. So I just want you to place, as your way of introducing yourself, where do you put cloud computing on that? 1, 2, or 3?
I would say that those who really embrace what's happening in this cloud computing area would place it in the 3rd category. And I think Nebula...
3rd category?
Yeah. Nebula,
like no other IT trend?
Yeah. And the reason why I'm taking that position is if you think about the technologies that are being developed to enable some of the products and some of the services that are emerging out of some of the world's largest companies today, they don't look like anything that enterprises have bought over the past 10 or 20 years. The projects like the OpenStack project or the Open Compute project, where we're really taking a lot of the complexity and a lot of the cost that have been integrated vertically into a lot of products from big vendors like Microsoft and big hardware companies. And we're seeing a consumerization of the underlying hardware components, bringing the least expensive processors and memory and DRAM and disks and ARM chips into these architectures, and we're seeing new software stacks emerge so that you can take these highly consumerized scale-out technologies and actually build applications on top of them. And those apps run very differently than all the apps that we've run in the past in the enterprise.
All right. There you are. CEO of Nebula says, number 3, absolutely nothing like it ever before. Lawrence.
So let me introduce our company first, Racemi. We're recognized in the industry as the moving company for the cloud. So when anyone is trying to figure out, okay, we've picked a private cloud or a public cloud and we're ready to move in it, our company, our technology, picks up your existing server images and migrates it into that new cloud environment. And we see the differences on the fly and make a hypervisor conversion, cloud tool injections, driver injections, registry settings, et cetera, to make your Linux, Windows, and x86 type environments work across virtual, cloud, and physical environment. So
is that 1, 2, or 3?
to answer the question, I think from what I see from a customer segmentation, it's all 3 based on facts. Based on if you look at the market and the way the folks that are attending here and other shows, there's 5 or 6 different segmentations of how the market is adapting to cloud computing. And I'm not seeing any one mega trend. I think we are in the early mainstream stage where cloud is sticking, it's driving business, and it's driving even production environments. But as far as any one trend, I'm seeing everything that you can imagine.
11th Cloud Expo. We're in the early stages. There are going to be some takeaways from this. Brian, I'm going to do the work now. What does the CEO of Appcore have to say? 1, 2, or 3?
Absolutely. Brian Donaghy, CEO of Appcore. We automate the business of cloud computing. And I want to agree with my first 2 colleagues here is that this trend is different from the aspect that we have 2 types of trends emerging or coalescing at the same time. And one is in IT and the other one is in utility. And that's why cloud computing is different. And so if you look at IT, we've gone through mainframe from client server, PC, virtualization, SaaS, into cloud as an IT kind of path. But if you look at utility from water, electricity, gas, telecommunications, compute is the next utility. And so that's where the public utility and the compute trends coalesce. And I think that's what makes this number 3.
Number 3. Another vote for number 3. Rob, what does the CEO of Adaptive Computing, of all the beautifully named companies, make of that? Where do you place it?
Well, thank you. And just let me mention, adaptive computing, we power some of the largest data centers and compute centers in the world in order to do private cloud and also high performance computing. I mentioned that latter one because I'm going to pick number 2. There's clearly aspects that are, by the way, your question's not a fair question because there's clearly aspects that are number 1. And there's clearly aspects that are.
Fair question.
Well, just think about it for a second. There's clearly aspects that are number 1. There's clearly aspects that are number 3. So by definition, it's number 2. It has to be some.
Number 2.
Okay. And somebody else said it's all 3. By the way, if it's all 3, it's number 2. That's some.
Excellent.
So let me just. We've talked a lot about why it's very different, and I agree with many of those things on the why it's different. There are some similarities. You can kind of tell I'm one of the older guys. It's a lot like time sharing. I started out my career in computing with time sharing. Let me tell you, we had issues of concerns about multi-tenancy, with multiple internal and external customers all sharing one large resource, whether that was a large mainframe or other large time-sharing environments. There are a lot of similarities to that. You know, grid's been around for a while. It's been around a little longer than cloud. It's certainly been big in high-performance computing. And while it lacks most of the virtualization, which I think is crucial to cloud computing, there are a lot of similarities. When you start asking about the ability to get computing on demand, likely utility, both grid and time sharing really represented quite a bit of that. The early days in the mainframe were very much computing was a utility. And that's the way it worked, and you paid for CPU minutes. And so there are parts of this that are definitely a little bit of back to the future. But at the same time, we have to recognize that we used pretty dumb devices back then to connect to these things, whether it was, literally punch cards or dumb terminals. Whereas today, the devices that we connect in cloud computing are marvelously smart in and of themselves, and as was mentioned, many cases owned by the individuals. And I think that really does provide a game changer.
Number 2. Joe, what does the author of Cloudonomics place cloud computing?
So I did some back of the envelope calculations, and the risk-adjusted expected value discounted into the present is about 2.6. So it is a mix of all of them, but I'm going to lean with revolutionary and not necessarily like prior trends. But besides being the author of Cloudonomics, I'm with Telx, which is a leader in the data center interconnection, co-location, and cloud enablement space. And based on that, the reason I would say that it's tending towards number 3 is that it's not just cloud computing in terms of a new payment and on-demand provisioning model, but I think the conflation of a number of major trends, including consumerization of IT, democratization of IT, global broadband bandwidth, accessing new applications in terms of rich media, the Internet of Things, all of those things tie together and are fundamentally enabled by cloud-y capabilities and infrastructure and services. And I agree with Chris that we still haven't seen anything yet. This is the 11th International Cloud Expo. May as well be binary 1-1 because there's still plenty more to come. And the reason for that, I think that no matter where you look, you can see dramatic possibilities for transformation in terms of everything from policy-based orchestration to SDN to software-defined data centers to the way we develop and interact with the cloud. I think we haven't yet paid attention to programming languages that are designed fundamentally to be cloud native. So we still have massive opportunity. And the weighted average, including the number 1, it's like other IT trends. With every trend, people have a great difficulty in anticipating discontinuities in relatively short time frames. So back in 93 or 94, when the World Wide Web first came on board and sort of entered the popular consciousness, I think it would be difficult to have predicted everything from Facebook to outages to privacy concerns to SSDs to any of the other thousands of things that are at various points on the hype cycle, but nevertheless, sooner or later, enter the mainstream and become ubiquitous and almost fall below the conscious level.
What is the Cordys take on this?
So Art Landro, CEO of Cordys, we're a platform as a service and cloud provisioning software provider. And I think it has the potential to be number 3, but it also has the potential to be trapped in 1 or 2. And what I think the differentiator is going to be for it to be really breaking out into 3 is not necessarily around the technology, but what does business do with the technology? And how do you leverage your marketing? How do you leverage your single view of the customer? How do you leverage all of the things that you want to drive from a business point of view? So we kind of stride both sides of the equation, the on-premise stovepipe world that everybody has complained about for so many years and have tried to bridge across. We're seeing the exact same kind of complexity get driven into the cloud as well, with stovepipes, just stovepipes in the cloud. So the technology is there, and as all technology trends happen, the technology is usually ahead of the business. But what I think is going to happen to drive it into the number 3 slot is for the business users to take advantage of the cloud. And to give you an example of that, there are instances all over the world where, let's say, a global marketing department needs to have unified communication around chat, around email, around telecommunications, around video conferencing. Previously, that would take 3, 4, 5 weeks to actually put together. Today, you can go to any number 1 of service providers, which are the non-traditional service providers, and get that up and running in a day, and sometimes at no cost. That is the business value that's going to break it into number 3.
Potential for 3. Rodney?
What was your question again?
I have no idea. But the answer's a number.
Yeah, I think if you had asked this question in 1991, 92, everybody would have said number 3. If you'd asked the question in 2000, everybody would have said number 3. I mean, about every 8 to 10 years, there's a cycle of innovation that is something that's never been seen before. Client server, internet, cloud, right? I think my head's going to explode if I hear the lightning to the electric utility anymore. So I won't do that. I think all the points made around how this cycle is more disruptive and different, all make sense and are, I think, somewhat inarguable at this stage of the game. I do think that this is more powerful technology than we've ever seen before as it relates to how not only consumer technologies can be developed and deployed and get to market, but how the enterprise could actually use it. I think this trend will allow, to some degree, the consumerization of the enterprise and being able to take those attributes of technology development that drive agility and drive efficiency. And I think that will find its way into the enterprise by way of this technology that we haven't seen yet. So I'll answer the question.
All right. So now you know who we've got there, but that was their way of finding out. So now we can speed up the cycle, and this is a free-for-all. Big data is the killer app of the cloud. How often have we heard that? Agree or disagree? Free-for-all and brief.
Disagree.
Disagree? Why?
There's lots of killer apps for the cloud.
Well,
Big
that
data
doesn't
is one of them.
negate the
Big data is one of them.
proposition.
I think big data is the killer hype app of the cloud today.
Okay, there you are.
And
That's telling.
I think every one
I
of
thought
our
that would flush somebody out of
Yeah, and I think every one of our companies is trying to figure out how to ride that. There's no doubt that the aspect of tons of data is driving a lot of the concerns and a lot of the interest in cloud. We definitely have customers with multiple petabytes of data at adaptive computing. It's a fairly common occurrence. There are huge issues and concerns with trying to manage and drive that much data. By the way, it's also an inhibitor to cloud. It's really hard to even move terabytes, let alone petabytes of data from very disparate locations in a cloudy-like fashion. So you've got to have a way where your workloads are very knowledgeable about where the data is that they need to be able to access.
So I think that's actually an argument for the cloud in the sense that, assuming that the cloud is inherently a geographically dispersed infrastructure, being able to collect data on a regional basis and run distributed queries against that, and then process it. When you have the cloud helping to reduce the total cost of a unit of compute, What it means is that you can marginally acquire business benefit from an additional calculation against data that you've already collected, right? In other words, if computing is very expensive, then, and collection of data is very expensive, then it's very hard to do anything with that for the business. But as the costs of both come down, if you can treat it intelligently, then you can make lots of useful business decisions, including promotions and marketing campaigns and personalization and, you know, all of the things without recapping the thousands of, you know, concepts in big data application like genomics and CERN and anything else.
And I think big data is, I think you need to have real-time big data for it to be a killer app, because real-time big data is much more applicable. So with IPv6, you have the Internet of Things, and everything can have an IP address. So you're sucking all of this information in, petabytes, up all the way up through some crazy numbers. But unless it's real-time big data, what's the point?
I agree with Joe on this, is that it changes the economics of big data as accessible to companies that didn't have that compute resource before. And so it pushes the availability of processing this type of data down out of university and out of the Fortune 100 type of companies to companies that are globally competing but may not have those resources available to them before. So I think it changes the social dynamics of what's available to them.
But I'm getting the sense you might, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but you're saying it's a bit of a red herring relative to, here we are at Cloud Expo. You think maybe
it's not, with what Art said about real-time big data, then that's a killer app.
Okay, so that's
a really killer app.
It's really the applications that create the data that are the killer apps. I think the question is big data itself the killer app? It's how do you harness it? What you do with it?
Right.
The technologies that we're in this cycle of now, that we broadly refer to as the cloud, is creating an immense amount of data that started with consumer technologies, really social technologies. Ultimately, this concept has been there, you know, for years and years. Business intelligence, data warehouses built on top of that, extract layers built on top of that. You're basically modernizing that extract stack and then being able to present that in a manner in which you can make use of the information, make decisions off that information. That's happening faster than it's ever happened. Somebody to harness it, you know, as the applications evolve that utilize access to that data and present and create a presentation layer that is something closer to real time and interpretive. I think, yeah,
Absolutely. It's the difference between knowledge and wisdom.
So I'm going to go back and say there's an awful lot of hype in here, guys. It's going to be really tough to spread petabytes of information across the internet, and the problem is bandwidth. Our internet speeds are too darn slow. And so if you look at the real applications that are actually involving petabytes of information, the vast majority of them are inside large data centers and compute centers. And that doesn't mean big data is not an issue for them. It absolutely is. But none of those guys are looking at trying to spread it out across a big amorphous public cloud. They're talking about how do I turn my data center into a private cloud so that it has the aspects of a cloud. So I think cloud is huge, but we are a long ways away from being able to solve the raw bandwidth speed issues to really handle this.
I think that, not to mix it, it's got to be in the private data center on computing systems like yours that can handle the capacity, where the data's at. I think when the internet, where the internet comes in is the answers. You know, so you're crunching all the data, you get the answer, but you send the answer to the smartphone, you send it to the marketing engine, and let marketing automation take over or whatnot. But I don't think you're moving all the data.
I vote Chris is allowed to speak.
Just one quick thing.
No, I vote he's allowed to speak. You're overruled.
So I would say big data is a killer app for the people on the stage. But when I think about killer apps, I think about things that touch the lives of everybody on this planet. You know, so when we first started seeing computers, the spreadsheet, right, email. Arguably what we saw happen to the music industry when we started carrying around these little devices that allowed us to have thousands of songs, the mobile phone, right? And so I don't think big data is a killer app in and of itself. I think
that's what Rodney's saying.
Right.
It's an absurd proposition.
Yeah, I think it's what will emerge at our banks and our insurance companies and our media companies and our internet companies and things that will actually touch our lives. So I think actually everybody here would be well served to think more about the kinds of applications that our products will enable, and to be more focused around the communities of technologies that will support those applications, and not just the hype around petabytes of this and gigabytes of that, and thousands of cores of this OpenStack stuff or Open Compute stuff. I think when we start to see the emergence of entire libraries of vertically specialized software in financial services and biotech, there's a whole emergence of really cool software coming out to support all these gene sequencers. And as the price of a gene sequencer comes down to a Xerox machine, we're going to see, you're going to go to your dentist or your doctor, and they're going to sequence your genome, and I bet there's a killer app or two in there for how medicine gets reinvented when big data is involved, right? But it's an enabling thing.
So I agree with that, and the sub-$1,000 USB stick sequencers are an example of that ubiquity sort of emerging. But what I was going to say is I don't disagree with you that because big data is heavy, what Dave McCrory calls data gravity, right? There's an effect that says if it's in your private data center, you're not going to want to move it around willy-nilly because it just takes too long. There's inertia effects. But on the other hand, what it also says is that if the big data is already in the cloud, then big data attracts applications to that, and that very same gravity and mass and inertia effect is as relevant in the public cloud as it is in the private enterprise data center. And so what you're already seeing is, companies like Amazon for free are taking US government data and they're hosting it at Amazon sites, and the point is that in turn acts to attract applications. You're seeing government effects, such as in Europe, any data that is created with public funding has to be made available to anyone to use. And the natural way that they're going to use any such massive databases is not, let me go, buy several petabytes of storage to put in my basement so I can process it. It's going to be run a lightweight application that could leverage Hadoop or what have you to be able to then deal with that big data that's sitting already in the public cloud. So both effects will happen.
Next question, very important to involve the audience, so just wake up, audience. This will go to the panel. Let's just start with you. How many people out there are, sorry, we can't see, but we've got very bright lights. How many of you are aware that the CIA has a venture capital arm? Right, so that's fairly standard knowledge. So let's now put this to our panelists. So In-Q-Tel, it's called. Do we all know the name? I don't know how known or not known these things are. So what are we to infer from the fact that In-Q-Tel is piling money into the creation of cloud tools for the intelligence community? Just so that there's a takeaway for this audience, because that's a really solid use case. You're talking about, this is all going to work, it's going to have to be private. So I'm assuming you're talking about a private instance here. But there you are, money's going in, so that speaks to this notion that Joe is raising of this, there is now this issue of public money has got to go certain ways, efficient ways, and light ways, and flexible ways. So what can we infer from that? So you as businessmen, is that a tipping point when the CIA is funding?
Isn't it fundamentally tied in with their mission, right, which is it's sort of the CIA equivalent of Google's mission around information.
Around the Wi-Fi?
Take all the information that exists in the world and then use it to determine various things regarding threats and trends and things like that. So it's the ultimate big data application.
The key to that, though, is actionable intelligence. Right? You've got to be focused on what are you looking for, and then what actions are you going to take based on the data.
You can't just collect.
So it's actionable intelligence, which the CIA is very good at. There's stuff going on at the CIA that we'll never know. And that actionable intelligence is across multiple databases, both private and public. And being able to take that information in and create it into actionable intelligence is the big challenge from big data. And real time, being able to do it where it actually makes a difference. Looking at historical trends is interesting from a research point of view, but being able to have real-time data coming in, creating actionable intelligence from it, and then being able to back up whatever those decisions are made is, I think, the key to some of the
So
things
again,
that are
Art,
changed.
you've circled back to the real time. That's when it all transforms.
So Adaptive Computing and Incutel made an announcement a couple of months ago, and I can't go into detail on all that's on there, but I recommend you go look up the press release.
Oh, okay.
But I do think there's tremendous interest in the Intel community, not just about the sharing of data, but just getting more efficient. And they're trying to figure out ways where they can have community clouds. They're not let's face it, they're not going to go to public cloud. It's not happening in that community. The security interests are too big. But a public cloud-like thing, which I would call a community cloud, which has all the issues of multi-tenancy and huge security issues and all the rest, where they can facilitate this sharing that we were just talking about and analysis, I definitely think that's a possibility.
I think one of the things that we're working on quite intently is, and I didn't introduce Virtustream earlier, but we're largely an infrastructure as a service provider that also has productized its internal cloud provisioning engine, and thus we have private cloud on-prem enablement software as well. So we have the ability to cloudify an on-prem data center and then burst and data replicate back to our off-prem facilities. We also provision in a manner unlike anyone else in the sense that we don't provision by a virtual machine. We actually break it down into an extensible container and create an abstract layer and provide resource pooling algorithms to essentially remove the headroom from virtual machines. The big thing that we're working on right now is the concept of federation and creating a new type of community cloud, or to facilitate new types of community clouds, whereas you have various companies in a supply chain that can actually exchange workload capacity in an accretive fashion. So it's sort of not this public untrusted exchange, it's a private exchange. So think of a healthcare exchange where you have a manufacturer, distributor, and a healthcare provider. A university consortium, something that's accretive, non-competitive, but you can actually federate workloads across legal entities. Very complex relative to the issues of keeping software OS, software versioning intact across that effort. But we feel that that's one of the next big areas for collaboration.
All right. No, you go on.
So does anybody in the audience work for the intelligence community? Raise your hand. Anybody
We're on
raise
the
your hand?
West Coast.
So to answer your question more succinctly, I think the answer to the audience and folks here is they don't really care. What they care about is that cloud is here and cloud is here to stay. And so I think everybody here is trying to say, I'm here representing my company or the companies, my customers, and what am I going to take away from here? Google's spending $680 million a quarter. Amazon this, all of these companies, cloud's here to stay. I think whether it's private cloud or public cloud, the question everybody has is how do I get started? And I think every year doing cloud is easier and easier and easier. And if you pick a project that's small enough and just get started, you should have your first private or public cloud up in days and really functional, multi-tenant, migrate workloads into it, use infrastructure as service, I think 5 of the folks up here have basically some sort of solution that is cloud in the box that gives you the infrastructure and everything that you need. I think it's ridiculous to think that cloud, is it really going to happen? Is this something that I should invest in or not? Because if the CIA is investing in it, that's the dinosaur that has jumped off the cliff and started to swim. So
now you made the case.
I think
you inadvertently made.
I think it means that if you're not as invested as they are, you're behind, and competitively that could hurt your business.
Right. Well, go on.
Yeah, I'll
maybe
add one other comment. I was. We're not done yet. So I spent 5 years at NASA. I was a CTO at NASA. I was a chief information officer. We spent $2 billion a year on IT. So like the CIA, you can't just say the CIA is this monolithic agency, right? There are a lot of people at every federal agency, and the federal government spends $90 billion a year. It's the largest buyer of IT in the world. That really are just trying to run 50 years of infrastructure. Right. But there's one group at the CIA that these are the smartest people that you'll never want to meet, right? They can't talk about what they're working on, and they're some of the smartest people in the world. And it's the same thing at NASA, right? There are teams of people that work on what lands on Mars. And if you look at Goldman Sachs, if you look at Credit Suisse, if you look at Deutsche Bank, if you look at every bank in the world, there's a little team in there working on some really incredible stuff. And I think cloud, when embraced by these teams, what they're looking for is the infrastructure that will power the future of their business. And if you think about the next 10 years of Cloud Expo conferences, what I think is going to happen is all the companies in the world are going to put things into exactly two buckets. Things that they'll consume as cloud services and things they'll provide as cloud services. And the really smart companies will have a very small number of applications that really define what they are. And you might even represent, if you think about all the companies you interact with, what would the app on your iPhone do if you were to use it to interact with them, right? And I think what's behind that application is what will be powered by the cloud. And I think for all there, all of us, we should be trying to seek out those people doing those really cool things, those applications that will define the future of every business on the planet and helping them succeed. And then the rest of this stuff will just evaporate.
You know what? I know a final word when I hear it, and that's a final word. Let us thank the CEOs of Nebula, come on, Nebula, and, come on, Racemi, and Appcore, and Adaptive Computing, and we'll come back to Joe in a minute, and Virtustream, and Cordys, and Joe wants to be the CEO of Telx. I know it. I hope this doesn't get you fired, but he's very senior and doing a good strategy job as VP of Strategy for Telx. Let's thank them again, please. You've got Temptations things to go to. You've got bars to liquor yourself up with. Thank you, guys. And 10 more years of Cloud Expo. I'm not going to live.